I'm Carl Ulrich, and I want to talk today about opportunity identification. Let me start with this story. This is my friend Alan Cook. He was also my student in 1995, and we actually started several businesses together. Here he's shown with one of his entrepreneurial ventures, an automated cat litter box, which he called Scoop Free. Alan was very successful with Scoop Free and eventually sold the business for quite a bit of money. After driving around Europe in his Porsche, he came back to the United States to try to figure out what was next. This shows the meeting that Alan had with some of his team members, including me, to address the question of what's next? What's the next entrepreneurial opportunity that Alan should pursue? This specific situation is an example of the more general situation that most executives and entrepreneurs face when they face an innovation opportunity. Specifically, can I create value, or how much value can I create by pursuing this particular opportunity? Or often, which of several alternatives that I'm considering is the one that's likely to create the most value? So those questions are quite similar. One just looks at a specific opportunity, and the other asks the question, relative to a set of opportunities, which one should I pursue? It's probably worth pausing for just a minute and saying what we mean by an opportunity. An opportunity in innovation is simply a hypothesis that the innovator can create value by investing further effort and resources. So an opportunity is always clouded by uncertainty. There's always some chance it won't work. So an opportunity is just a hypothesis. And by hypothesis, we mean a proposition or a belief that value can be created. The innovation activities then are devoted to resolving the uncertainty and to really proving out whether or not value can be created. Let me give you a specific example. Let's look here at what's labeled Idea 133, and I'll say in a minute where it comes from. But the idea is for a tofu press. And the idea is that many cooks, particularly cooks who do a lot of Asian cooking, would like to brown their tofu, but the tofu is too wet to do that. So this idea is to create a press that can remove some of the water from the tofu. So I'll let you think about that. Do you think value can be created by pursuing the tofu press? Let me tell you about some of my own experiences that helped inform my thinking about that while you think about the tofu press. This is a product that I created about 15 years ago. It's the Zooter Scooter. And the Zooter was a commercial hit. It was used by celebrities like Tommy Chong, shown here riding the product. In fact, it was so successful, it was one of just 3 products that Steve Jobs kept in his office at Pixar Animation Studios. So at the end of that experience, I concluded that business was easy, that pretty much any opportunity that I pursued could turn into a successful business. Let me show you my second entrepreneurial venture. This is the Veloci electric motorbike. The Veloci was a critical success. And that's just a code word for commercial failure. That is, the critics liked it, the customers just didn't buy it. And so this business essentially failed. Those 2 experiences really caused me to reflect on what makes for a good idea, what makes for an innovation opportunity that offers the most promise of success. Well, there are 2 theories that explain the role of the idea itself in innovation success. The first is illustrated by the example of Hotmail. This is Sabir Bhatia. Sabir Bhatia was the creator of Hotmail. And if you'll recall, Hotmail was the very first free email service. Many of us at the time were paying $30, $40, $50 a month for email services from people like Yahoo and AOL and Earthlink. And Hotmail came along and said you could have free, unlimited email as long as you were willing to put a little advertisement in the footer of your email. So in many ways, Hotmail was a precursor to many of today's business models, including AdWords at Google. Sabir Bhatia was so convinced that the idea itself was incredibly valuable that he actually wrote 2 business plans. The first business plan was a decoy. He used it to vet venture capitalists. If he felt he could trust the venture capitalists, he would then pull out the second plan, and the second plan was for Hotmail. Now, Sabir would only have behaved this way if he believed deeply that the idea itself was incredibly valuable, that there was value merely in the idea behind Hotmail. Now, there's a competing theory that's illustrated quite well by an example from Nest Labs. This is Tony Fadell and Matt Rogers, who led the development of the Nest thermostat. They were able to attract $100 million in venture capital to pursue this opportunity. Now, that kind of enthusiasm over a new thermostat can really only be explained by the fact that Fadell and Rogers had led 18 generations of iPod and iPhone development at Apple. And so investors believed that almost whatever Fadell and Rogers pursued would result in the creation of tremendous value. So really, we have two quite different theories here. One that says the idea itself is incredibly valuable. That's the example of Hotmail. And the other that suggests that, well, maybe the idea itself doesn't matter so much. What matters is the kind of team that you put on that opportunity. Now, to reconcile those views, I developed what I call the V-Day model. V-Day, which is Latin for C, simply says that value V is a function of the idea itself, which I call I, the development of that idea, D, and the exogenous factors, E. And exogenous is just a fancy word for the factors that are outside your control. Think of it as what's the weather? So if you think about it, the V-Day model suggests that the idea then is acted on by your development resources and the weather, or the exogenous factors, in order to create value. And all three of those factors are important in determining the eventual value realized. Let me give you an analogy for helping to think about this model. Let's imagine that you are trying to extract value as a gold miner. You're trying to mine for gold and make as much money as you can, create as much value as you can. The amount of value you can create as a gold miner is driven by three things. First, what's the location of the mine? That's like the idea itself. Is there gold in the ground? If there's no gold in the ground, you won't be able to extract any value. And in product or service innovation, you could think about this as if there's no pain out there, if there are no customers out there who have the pain point or have the need, you're not going to make any money innovating around that opportunity. So the location of the mine is like the idea. D is your development resources, or in the context of gold mining, it would be how good are you, how efficient are you at digging up and extracting the ore from the gold? The better you are at that, the more value you'll be able to extract from a given mine location. And then E is the exogenous factors. And in gold mining, you could think of that as what's the price of gold? You don't have any direct influence over the price of gold, but the price of gold directly determines or is directly proportional to how much value you're likely to be able to create. Now, of course, all three factors matter. The idea, what you do with the idea, D, and the exogenous factors or the weather. All of those things matter in determining value. Now, if you actually look at outcomes in innovation, you see that they're highly skewed, meaning that most innovation opportunities fail to create any value, but some opportunities create a huge amount of value, maybe 1,000 or even 10,000 times the amount invested. And so when you look at skewed distributions of outcomes like that, I conclude that these factors must combine in what can be conceptually thought of as a multiplicative factor. So in other words, it's like the idea is multiplied by what development resources you have, and that's multiplied by how good is the weather or how the exogenous factors go. So it's not like you can take a bad idea and compensate for it by doing a little better job of development. It's really that all three of these factors combine in a multiplicative fashion, and only when they're all three aligned do you create a tremendous amount of value. Now, I want to just report in a summary fashion on some empirical research I looked at in consumer product innovation to try to explain how much of the value created is the result of the quality of the idea itself, or I. So the basic question is, if we could somehow measure the idea, measure the quality of the opportunity, how predictive of the eventual commercial success would that measurement be? And in statistical terms, for those of you who are statisticians or who know statistics, the question is, if you look at the variance in economic value created, how much of that variance is explained by variance in the quality of the raw idea? To answer that question, I did a study of the crowdsourcing website Quirky.com. Some of Quirky's products are shown here. There's a cable organizer, a divided water bottle, an articulated power strip, and yes, a tofu press. This image actually contains Quirky's most successful and least successful products. Now, I was able to look at a large sample of Quirky's products, evaluate the raw ideas as they were first articulated, and then look at the extent to which that evaluation of the raw ideas predicted their eventual commercial success. Now, let's now turn to that question. How do we evaluate the ideas themselves? Now, our impulse as innovators and as managers is to look at a large set of criteria. Some of the criteria we might look at include how significant is the need? How effective is our solution at addressing the need? Will there be large gross margin to contribute to our other costs? How hard will it be to acquire customers? And are we the best team to actually go after this opportunity? What are our skills and capabilities? Now, I say that's the natural impulse among managers of organizations, but I'd like to suggest, and our research shows, that there's actually a much simpler measure that's the best single predictor of commercial success, at least in consumer product innovation, and I suspect it applies more generally. And that measure is consumer purchase intent. That is, if you sample a relatively large sample of consumers and expose them to the innovation opportunity, what fraction of those consumers express an intention to purchase the product or service? The standard purchase intent survey simply exposes them to the concept and gives them 5 choices, from definitely would not buy to definitely would buy. And typically best practice is to look at the top box, that is the definitely would buy box, and maybe the second to top box as well. Now, when we did that at Quirky, we also considered using a sample of experts to evaluate the innovation opportunities. And so we actually convened a panel of 7 experts, and these were terrifically experts, executives who had led product development at major corporations, major global corporations, professionals who had led product development at product development consulting firms, 7 truly experts. And what we found, to my surprise, was that 4 random consumers were about as predictive as 7 experts. Now, since experts are relatively expensive, relatively inconvenient to convene in order to evaluate innovation opportunities, this suggests that using consumers, potential users of the product or service, is the most efficient way to assess purchase intent. And we found that a sample of about 15 consumers gives sufficient predictive power, gives you about as much predictive power as if you had a much larger sample. Now, for those of you who are interested in the details of that study, I've put a reference here to an academic paper that describes the study and the results in more detail. So let's go back to idea 133, the tofu press. I asked you to make a prediction about how much value could be created. I hope your answer was not very much, because it turns out that the tofu press, of the 166 ideas that we looked at in the Quirky contest, was the lowest rated product on consumer purchase intent, and indeed proved to be the lowest selling product that Quirky ever produced or sold. More generally, consumer purchase intent explains around 6% of the sales rate for products sold on the Quirky website. Now, 6% on the face of it doesn't sound like very much, but when you consider that what we actually predicted was the log of the sales rate, that is a measure that's quite nonlinear. A 6% explanatory power is quite significant. And to put that in terms that are maybe more intuitive, if you're able to pick an idea or an opportunity that is one standard deviation better, that is, it has a one standard deviation higher response to the question, how likely would you be to purchase this product or service, that corresponds to about a 75% higher sales rate in nominal terms. So tremendous difference in nominal sales by picking an opportunity that's at least one standard deviation better on that consumer purchase intent measure. Now, I want to temper that result with a couple of observations. This is an example of an idea that was presented in my class on developing web-based products and services in the Wharton MBA program. This was an idea for a service called cabstalker.com. The basic idea was that you could take a smartphone, use it to call a taxi or a vehicle to pick you up. Does that sound familiar to you? In fact, this idea predated Uber and Lyft in the United States. And interestingly, it was presented by one of my most successful students, Neil Blumenthal, who later went on to found Warby Parker, valued at more than $1 billion today. My point with the CabStalker example is to suggest that this idea itself was actually not worth very much by itself. What created tremendous value for Uber and Lyft was their ability to execute on this idea, and to some extent the weather, for instance, the regulatory environment. Indeed, if you look today, there are many competing services built around essentially the same idea. Here's a photo of a driver who's using his car for Lyft, Uber, and Sidecar all at the same time, suggesting that the idea itself can't possibly be the major source of value here, or at least be the only source of value, because many competing companies are pursuing the same idea. Let me just summarize a few implications of the challenge of how to measure the value of an opportunity and the role the opportunity plays in determining success. The quality of the idea I does in fact explain some of the variance in outcomes. It explains a significant fraction of the variance in outcomes, but I don't want you to believe that other factors aren't important. D and E are also extremely important. However, given that measuring the quality of the idea itself is quite simple, using consumer purchase intent or user purchase intent, there's really no reason to work on an opportunity that isn't evaluated quite highly. The other implication is that you should be careful about imputing wild success to your brilliance. It may in fact be due to many other factors, and that was certainly the case for me with my first venture with the scooter design. On the other hand, maybe failure isn't entirely due to your incompetence, and so that at least I take some comfort in that notion as I consider my second commercial venture, which was a failure. The implication is the exogenous factors also matter a lot. Let me circle back to what Alan did, just to finish that story. Alan developed a set of criteria. I show them here. These were his actual criteria that he articulated before that meeting where we considered the next steps. He also did a sample of what consumers want. As a result of that analysis, the data and reflection on what he thought he could be quite good at as a result of his prior venture, Alan launched a company called Brilliant Pad that takes the basic idea for his automated cat litter box and applies it to dogs. So interesting opportunity, and as of this filming, we don't know how it's going to come out. So I encourage you all to check it out, and we'll watch with interest to see how well he did. I want to finish by talking about where opportunities come from, because many of you asking the question, okay, I have a sense of how I would evaluate an opportunity, but where do I get these opportunities? And I want to just first say that in most existing organizations, About half of the opportunities come from within the organization. They're generated by employees, the sales force, people working in product development, and other members of the team. And about half of the opportunities come from outside the organization. They're the result of suggestions from customers, from comments from partners, from ideas from competitors, from observations about what's happening in the public sphere. So about half internally and about half externally. Now, we've given you the book Innovation Tournaments, and we devote 2 chapters of this book to techniques for exploring and developing innovation opportunities. And I think probably the best approach to learning those techniques is just to consult the book. So we're going to refer you to chapters 2 and 3, which focus on identifying opportunities from internal and from external sources. Finally, let me point out that while the overall structure of our course, and indeed of most innovation organizations, is a tournament structure, meaning the organization identifies a large sample of raw opportunities, passes them through a series of development steps and filters in order to identify the exceptional few that are most likely to create tremendous value. This is the structure we will use in the innovation workshop. But you, as an individual innovator participating in the workshop, should also think in tournament logic. And so I recommend that as an individual, you generate many opportunities, 5, 10, or more, that excite you and that satisfy the mission statement. And then you consider those opportunities yourself, sampling friends and family, sampling people in the target market, thinking about your own skills and capabilities, and then select one that can then be presented to the group. In that way, you're using tournament logic, both as an individual, searching for opportunities and selecting one to contribute to the group effort. And then that feeds into a larger tournament structure within the workshop itself. An opportunity is merely a hypothesis that value can be created. Uncertainty always clouds the future prospects for an opportunity. If it didn't, there wouldn't be any reason to invest in innovation. We'd know what to do. Our goal in innovation, in developing opportunities, is to resolve sufficient uncertainty that we can proceed to invest in opportunities with a high likelihood of creating commercial value. Remember, the idea isn't everything. The development of that idea and the exogenous factors matter. But because generating and evaluating opportunities is relatively inexpensive, there's no reason not to devote sufficient and significant resources to generating and evaluating innovation opportunities.